As you know, I'm always looking for new ghost stories, and you can tell your ghost story to me in person if you book at the Phantom History House Bed and Breakfast. Go to phantomhistoryhouse.com, check out our 4 themed rooms, and book, and we will talk very soon. Hey everybody, Steve here at the Phantom History House here in Tampa, Florida, and I'm really excited to be talking to Miranda Young, all the way up in Tennessee. Miranda, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for having me.
Oh, I'm thrilled to have you and to talk a little bit more about the Scott County Jail. I've already interviewed Kristy, your business partner, and got some kind of a feel for what the place is like. But I know that you two work very closely in making this a unique experience for visitors, as well as investigating the paranormal aspect of things, which we all love. But before we get into all of that, I was wondering if you could tell me a little bit about your background, and how you got into the whole paranormal historical world.
Sure, absolutely. So my name is Miranda, and I'm actually better known as the Ghost Biker. I travel around the country on my motorcycle to different haunted and historic locations, and I highlight them on my web series. We just finished filming season 6, and so I've been doing Ghost Biker for 6 years, but I've been investigating the paranormal for just under 15. And I was with a team prior to going out on my own and becoming a solo investigator. And so like I said, about 4.5 years ago, ended up meeting my best friend and business partner, Dr. Kristy Sumner, and we formed History, Highways, and Haunts. We both have the love for the history of these locations, and both of us, when we're highlighting them on our shows, really go in deep into the history so that we can really know who we're communicating with and really be able to share these unique stories of these locations. For me, what really got me into the paranormal was really more of the storytelling side, the legends, the folklore. My grandmother, she lived next door to me, and so I spent a lot of time growing up down there on her porch listening to her tell stories about growing up in the Appalachian Mountains. And she shared many stories about, as we call them around here, haints and boogers, which would be the haunts and then the cryptids. So she shared a lot of stories about that, and that really piqued my interest. And so I spent as much time as I could in libraries and talking to other old timers and folks here in East Tennessee, trying to get some of these stories to essentially learn more and help them live on. So I really come at this from more of the historical and storytelling side of things.
And I love that because I'm the same way. I'm a huge history buff, and I love to kind of tie the two together. Yes, something eerie is happening here, but who in history is trying to communicate with us? Is how I kind of like to look at that. And that looks like exactly what you and Kristy are doing with the jail, there in Scott County. But before we dive into that, another question for you. I love that you got these stories from your grandmother on the porch. And haints and haunts, is that what you said? Haints and
Haints,
boogers. Haints and
haints and boogers.
I am writing that down. That's going to be part of my new vocabulary.
Some of that East Tennessee Appalachian vernacular, I guess.
I love it. I will adopt it as my own. I'm
I
originally from
love
St.
it.
Louis, but have been in Florida for 23 years. And so I'm uh, open to any and all of those vernaculars. I was wondering, if you have had if you've had a paranormal experience, and what was the earliest paranormal experience you recall?
Probably my earliest paranormal experience would be, I really didn't grow up in a haunted house or anything like that, but my elementary school was haunted. And so my librarian, she made sure that every student that passed through the halls of the elementary school knew about the doctor and the deputy who had been killed there at the school back in the late 1920s, 1927 to be exact. They were showing a movie up on the second floor of the school. Around here, we would use schools and other buildings, they would double as different venues. And so the school actually doubled as a movie theater. And so they were showing a comedy, and one of the local deputies had showed up with his partner to serve a warrant at this particular movie. It was a comedy that they were showing. And some of the kids had gotten a little bit wild. And the deputy who was there serving the warrant, he was actually drunk on moonshine whenever he showed up. And so he got on to the kids. The doctor ended up asking him to calm down. he didn't calm down, and he told the doctor that if he spoke up again, he was gonna shoot him. And so there ended up being a shootout there, and he killed the doctor and also killed his deputy partner. And so with all of that happening at the school, the librarian, she shared those stories about the phantom gunshots that you would hear, the phantom laughing. You could still see the bullet holes there in the wall on the second floor. So from an early age, I was always wanting to go up there and go ghost hunting and see if we could have any experiences up there on that second floor of the school. I really didn't have an actual paranormal experience that I could document until I started investigating just under 15 years ago.
And of course, you probably had better equipment and you knew exactly what you were looking at that point as well. I would think that to have a career as a paranormal investigator, you would have had to have found something early on to say, okay, there's something there and I need to continue. So 15 years ago or so, what was it that got you hooked into this world?
So my adult background, if you will, is in marketing and graphic design. I'm also a professional artist and photographer. And so I was actually approached by the team that I used to be a member of to look at some photographs. And so they essentially wanted me to look at these photographs, try to debunk them, and try to give a logical explanation of some of the things they had captured there. So I started looking at those. One photo turned into two, two turned into 20, 20 turned into 50. And they ended up inviting me to go on an investigation to essentially pay me back for looking at the photos. And my first investigation was at a local bar in Marina in downtown Chattanooga. And it was such a cool experience because it was just myself and these other two guys. And the two guys, they had been investigating for, I think at that time, 8 or 9 years. So they were great as far as really learning about going in and investigating. Again, I'd been investigating cemeteries and other locations like that since I was a kid, but not actually going on a full scale investigation. And so we went in, and I'll never forget the first flashlight activity as well as some of the first disembodied voices that I heard. And then going back and listening to the recordings on my recorder and hearing these voices responding intelligently, and just that mix of almost like a sick but an adrenaline type feeling, like a sick to your stomach but adrenaline feeling, that as soon as I heard that, it just made me want more, and it left me with more questions than answers. And I found that, after that, we had such good luck that with responses and everything, that they invited me on a couple more investigations and then invited me to join the team. So I really was able to cut my teeth with some folks who were very professional and very good at what they did. So I felt like I learned a lot in that process and was able to take what I'd learned from growing up, and apply that to my actual paranormal investigating today.
And that's one of the things I love about the paranormal community is that everyone seems so willing to share their experience and their expertise and say, hey, this worked for us. This might not work for you, but hey, you can try it. I love how that works in the world that we're in here.
Absolutely.
So fast forwarding quite a bit to the jail that you now run alongside your best friend Kristy.
Mm-hmm.
How familiar were you with the jail prior to having your role there now?
So the jail is in my hometown of Huntsville, Tennessee. And so I was familiar with that jail from early childhood. The jail is such a unique structure. It's made out of sandstone. It's 3 stories and it's shaped like a castle. And a castle here in the middle of the mountains of East Tennessee is something you don't see every day. And so with it where it's sat, it's right there in the back of the square in Huntsville, which Huntsville is a very small town, but it was right outside the library. And so I spent so much time in that library. I can remember going in with my mom from a very, very young age and looking over to my left side there and seeing the inmates hanging out the windows or being in the backyard there at the jail, and really wondering what does it look like on the inside? Could that place be haunted? And I just kept thinking, I know that's got to be haunted in there. And so I did know the history of it very well. and also a lot of the history and stories that surrounds the jail. I grew up hearing those. Plus, I had some family who very, very early on during the building of the jail, that they worked there. So very familiar with it. And after it ended up closing down, I wasn't sure what they were going to do with it. But back in 2020, the opportunity came up to where I needed to move back to the area to help my mom and to just be in the area. And I was speaking to a friend who worked for the government here in the community, and I asked him if, because I host a lot of haunted motorcycle rides, and I was asking him if this could be a spot of maybe using it as a stop, and he said, they hadn't done anything with it since they got the tourism grant. So I ended up approaching Kristy and saying, what I have in mind for this is possibly too much for one person. And so her situation was that she was able to pack up and join me in this. And so we've been at it for ever since, for I guess the past year and a half.
And starting something like this in the middle of a pandemic, one, I'm sure had to be its own challenge. But if that building is as old, I mean, it's what, early 1900s, I believe it was constructed.
1904, yes.
1904. So the building's been around for a while. So I'm assuming that when you went in, that some work needed to be done to have it presentable. Am I correct there?
It is. They had gotten a $75,000 tourism grant back in 2017. The county ended up giving the bank, or excuse me, giving the jail to the town of Huntsville. And so at that point in time, they did get the tourism grant. They went in, they painted the walls, they added windows or glass to the windows, and then added a new heating and cooling system in there. Of course, it still sat vacant for 5 years before we ended up coming in, because they still didn't really know what they wanted to do with it. They just knew they wanted to preserve it. So we did have quite a bit of work that we did. As far as the museum, that's all us. With Kristy's business background and with my marketing and design background, we were able to go in and make it into a functional museum, but really kind of put our handy skills to work, plugging holes and trying to really fix it up and make it presentable and accessible to the community while still keeping that rustic look.
Exactly. And of course, you need it to be safe for guests and all that kind of thing too, which of course is understandable. Um, you finally get the keys to the place and you walk inside, get to see inside and out the entire building. What was your take on that? And is it haunted?
Well, I was actually the first person to be able to investigate it back in 2014. So almost 10 years before ended up going in. So I was able to go in there, do an investigation. And of course, this was before they did any of the renovations and fix of it. It was very, very rough and definitely not very safe inside. But I had some pretty interesting activity, especially in the drunk tank. I didn't know as much of the internal history. I knew a lot of the stories surrounding it as far as the lynchings and some of the murders and stuff that had taken place there, but I wasn't really aware of some of the inner day-to-day stuff that we know today. And so one of the things that stands out that I got was when I was in the drunk tank, I was able to get audible and great EVPs, but also audible and disembodied sobbing and crying. And it was a female. Later we did find out that there was a lady who did attempt suicide there inside of the drunk tank. And that is a common thing that us, as well as other teams, have captured in there. But that was the one thing that really stood out to me that I had captured. So when I was talking to Kristy, I said, I know when I went, there was activity, but we really spent probably about 2 months going in, cleaning up, and really sitting down, not so much actively investigating, but sitting there and communicating with the spirits, trying to put our intentions out there, let them know what we were doing, especially since the place had been closed for so long. So we wanted to go in, have them feel comfortable, because we were essentially invading their space and changing a lot of things around. So we went in and we was trying to see some different things that would invoke reactions. And one of the things we did find up on the third floor, especially, was that music is such a wonderful trigger item in there. And we spent so much time that we were able to figure out certain songs that almost every time you play it triggers some type of activity. And they've got to the point now where they know whenever we're going up giving a flashlight tour or going up and there's a team and we're talking about it, tools start going off because they know and think we're going to play their specific songs they like.
That is amazing. And I hear often that, paranormal investigators who investigate a place regularly kind of get to know the ghosts and vice versa. So that sounds like that's what's going on here. I don't want to give away all your secrets, so I'm not going to ask specifically what song it is that you play, but is there an era associated with that? Because I know the jail was open for a long time.
There are several different eras, and one of the things that we do find that does seem to be a good trigger item is religious music, some of the old hymns. And one of the spirits who does hang around the location, all three floors that we do get really good residual and intelligent hauntings from, is Sheriff Richard Ellis. And he was actually a preacher, a Baptist pastor. And so while he was there in office, he was killed there at the front door. But he was known as the preacher, and so we believe that that's one of the reasons that Amazing Grace is one of the songs that is very popular. So we do believe that that may be one of the reasons. Of course, here in the middle of the Bible Belt, a lot of these folks who were in jail on Saturday night would be in church on Sunday morning. And so it was one of those things. It was real important to them, and a song from their youth. And it's really one that transcends all time. But they do tend to like, some of them like Southern rock, especially from the late 80s, early 90s. And then we do have several in there that actually really like old 50s and 60s country music.
So a very diverse music selection going on in that place. But, again, with it being that old of a jail, and it had men and women inmates over its time, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that correct?
It did.
Okay. You talked about Sheriff Ellis. Are there any other spirits in there that you have been able to identify and say, oh, we know who this entity is that we're speaking to?
Yes, and Sheriff Ellis, he also had a very unique characteristic about himself. He was a very, very tall man. He was between 6'7" and 6'8". And one of the shadow figures that we do see there, especially on the first floor over by the drunk tank, is right around 6'8", because he'll stand there in the door frame, and the door frame's 7 foot. It's interesting because Sheriff Ellis was killed by a moonshiner, and he ran under the stance that he was going to make Scott County as dry as the Sahara. So it actually makes sense that he does show up there around the drunk tank and in that area. Now, of course, back in the 1920s when he was killed, that area was not a drunk tank at that time. But, we do believe that some of the activity we get from him is intelligent, and I believe that's why he hangs out there. Another one of the spirits that we do get constant contact with is Jerome Boyett. He was one of the unfortunate 6 people who were lynched from the jail, and he was 23 years old. He was taken out, him and his cellmate, Harvey Winchester, they were taken out onto about a mile and a half off the property and brutally murdered by a mob of 25 people who had broke into the jail. We do get activity associated with him, as well as an inmate. We don't know too much about this guy, but he goes by the name either Big Roy or Big Boy. And he tends to like to communicate with the ladies up on the 3rd floor. And he really don't leave his cell much, even when we open the door for him. But if a woman is sitting in the bullpen, or if she goes into the cell, she said that he really likes to communicate with her. And so that's just a few. We've got several more that we might not always be able to pinpoint their name down, but we can kind of tell by the characteristics of their activity that there's someone who is familiar that does hang around the jail.
And I know that record keeping isn't always great whenever you're spending more than 100 years in one location. So I'm sure finding those details can be challenging at certain times.
Absolutely. We do have a really good archive system here, and the Historical Society does really great at keeping that. Unfortunately, we did have a fire at our courthouse, and so records, unless there are some somewhere that we are unaware of, records past the 1950s are a little bit spotty. I know that there are some here and there, and of course, it always depended on the administration. Some were a little more diligent than others, but for the most part, it was really tough to find certain pieces. Now, we did have a former deputy who did loan us. I think he loaned us thousands of newspapers. So we've been able to go in, and our newspaper system has been really good as far as documenting the different events in the community. So we've been able to go in and get different stories that we're able to put up on the wall and find different stories that correlate with some of the different inmates that we have heard stories about. Like our longest serving inmate there, Robert Goad. He was in there for murder, and he was a master mechanic. And so because he was such a good mechanic, he ended up saving the county a lot of money because the sheriff was able to petition for him to serve his time out there at the jail rather than sending him on to Brushy Mountain Prison. And so if he needed a part for one of the sheriff's cars, they would allow him to go into town and get the part. But he served his 7 years out there and was essentially a model inmate. And then he went on after he got out to open his own service station up in town. But we have his stories. We were able to find his records and actually find the newspaper story talking about the murder. So some areas are a little bit better than others. Others, it's just some of the officers would just, or the sheriff would just check them in. And that was about the extent of how far that information went.
Now, going back a little bit to what you said about the cellmates who were pulled out by a mob of 25 or so, what was the crime that they were accused of? Do you know that information?
I do. So Jerome Boyett and Harvey Winchester, they were taken out of the jail in 1933, in June of 1933. And so they were actually in there for unrelated crimes. Harvey Winchester had been in there about 7 or 8 months before Jerome Boyett came in, and he had killed a deputy there or here in Scott County when he was put in there. Jerome Boyett, he was actually he was. It said that he was playing cards on a train car, and a call came in that there was a disruption of the peace going on there in that train car. It was actually an erroneous call. We've heard that it may be because he was a moonshiner, and it's believed that maybe a rival moonshiner had made the call saying that. But nonetheless, he was 23, and the neighboring sheriffs, George and his son Floyd Winningham, showed up, and there was a gunfight between Jerome Boyett and the sheriff. And so he ended up killing the sheriff's son. He went on the run. And then while he was on the run, a posse that was trying to avenge the sheriff's death showed up at Jerome Boyett's dad's house asking where he was. Jerome Boyett's dad wouldn't give him up, so they ended up hanging him. And so Jerome ends up finding out that his dad was killed. So he came to the jail, turned himself in, and 8 days later he was taken out with his cellmate Harvey Winchester. So even though they were in there for unrelated crimes, they were essentially both cop killers, and so, or allegedly cop killers. And so not really sure who was in the mob of 25 people, if they could have potentially been connected in some way. But regardless, neither of the two got their day in court, and they were very, very brutally murdered. And that seems to be the case. We know of six at least. I'm pretty sure that there were more, but we're just finding these are the only ones that we have the actual story of. And it just seems in each of the cases where these folks were taken out, they were taken out from anywhere from 25 to 50 masked men and taken to different various places on the property and either lynched or shot.
And I would assume that a brutal ending like that contributes to them still hanging around and haunting the location.
Yeah.
Like in with these two, I'm assuming they're both still there in some form in your experience.
We believe so. Definitely residual energy. I mean, you can only imagine the night that it happened, just how crazy it would be I mean, because essentially the jail was taken over. The jailer was beaten, and the jailer's wife was taken by surprise when all of this happened. And so you have, and of course the jail is very echoey, and so you can only imagine that when all of these people stormed in, just the chaos that would have ensued. So from just all of that energy, the residual energy that takes place is off the charts. But we have had, when you sit there and start questioning and asking specific questions about events that took place, we've gotten a lot of intelligent responses coming from Jerome and Harvey's cell. So we do believe that their energies are there in some form or fashion.
And that's amazing that you're able to link that directly to the historical record. And again, we already talked about that, about how cool that is. I mean, it's a shame that that happened, but how cool it is for us here in 2023. Um, uh, I'm curious if there is a moment that stands out for you in the jail that caught you off guard, surprised you, or maybe scared you the most, that you were like, wow, this is really happening in this place where I'm working. And if you'd be willing to share that story with me.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, being there as long as we're there, I mean, Kristy and I are there sometimes up to 16 hours a day, just with our day tours and our night tours. But one of the things that really stands out in my mind, we had just started having paranormal investigations there. And so it was very, very early on. We had really only been open to the public, I think, 2 weeks before we had our first paranormal team. And so the way we have it set up is we have someone that's basically on site but out of sight there when the teams are investigating. And so the team had been gone for about 30 minutes. So it was about 3:30 in the morning. And I had gone up onto the upper levels. I had cleaned up and was getting things ready for when Chris was going to come in and open the next morning. So when I was coming out of the gift shop, I ended up hearing something over on the stairwell about between the second and third level. And it sounded like this really deep voice, deep, rich hum. I really didn't realize that was what I was hearing until it cleared its throat and continued on. So it went for about 3 seconds, clears its throat, and then goes for another 3 seconds, which that's 6 seconds of activity is quite a long time in paranormal time. So I'm standing there and I'm kind of shocked and also a little bit upset that I don't have my recorder with me. And so I go back into the gift shop, and as I'm getting my stuff to leave, you can kind of see me on the video camera in the gift shop. I'm looking just a little bit, just like, I can't believe I just heard that. And so I go in, I get my stuff, and then I go home. So I messaged Chris and I said, hey, when you come in the next morning, check the video footage in the gift shop around 3:30 and let me know if we were able to capture this hum. Well, we didn't capture the hum, but she calls me all excited the next day and she's like, so I saw the people leave on the camera 30 minutes earlier. And she said, the timestamp that you said, we didn't catch the hum. But when you go back into the gift shop, we caught two voices. And one of them says, there she is. And the other says, not so loud next time. And so we believe, this is constant activity that we get there, very consistent. The spirits are not only very intelligent, but they're very aware of what's going on. And so it was such an incredible capture just on this security cam footage that the local news actually picked it up as a story and they played the footage there on the news because I mean, it's crazy. It was two voices, we believe, one male and one female, and they were clearly telling whoever was humming on the stairs that they needed to not be so loud next time.
That's incredible. And it shows that they were watching you and they're very aware of you being there.
Yes.
And I wonder if they were wanting to be quieter so they don't disturb you or to not be discovered.
That's a good point, and I've often wondered that because there's certain spirits, especially depending on what floor they're on, you can tell that they may just be going about their day, and then when you hear something or you start to kind of make yourself aware to them, it's like, oh, or make them aware that you know they're there. The activity changes. Other times there's certain ones that they clearly want you to know that they're there.
Incredible. And of course, that means not only for you and for Kristy, but for your guests and the ghost tours and everything that you do. They're in on the fun, it sounds like almost in some ways.
Absolutely. Yeah. Most of the time on our flashlight tours, when we do, so those are our most popular. We do flashlight tours, we do a fully immersive guided ghost hunt, and then we have the private paranormal investigations. And the flashlight tours are our most popular because those are 90 minutes, and a lot of people, they may just be paranormal enthusiasts, but we give a K2 meter when we go. And it's crazy because we always tell them, if we start telling stories and your K2 meter starts going off, just interrupt us, let us know, because there's certain stories that it doesn't matter what part of the jail you're in. If you're telling us one of those stories, one of those K2s will go off. And sometimes it's almost like they're laughing at us, and other times it's like they're saying, "Yeah, that was me. I did that." So we always tell the people, just let us know. And we even do a little session up on the third floor playing a song to see if that triggers activity. And so to be able to experience that most of the time, there's usually something, if it's not a super active night with our flashlight tours, people are at least getting responses to some of the different stories that we're telling. And that's always pretty cool.
I'm sure, and I'm sure the reactions you get from your guests are amazing too, because it's hard to find paranormal activity. But it sounds like in the jail, again, I know it's not guaranteed every time,
Right.
but it sounds like it's a pretty regular occurrence for you.
It
And
is. It is. And it's day or night.
okay, and that was going to be my next question. Does it have to be a flashlight tour? Obviously not. Spirits can be
Mm.
aware and around at any time. Um, I could talk to you forever about this and go super, super deep into history. Unfortunately, we don't have that kind of time, and I know you have stuff you need to do. So before we wrap up, just a couple more quick questions for you. And I asked this question to Kristy as well, and I'm just interested to get your take. You kind of already answered it, but it's a three-story jail. I believe the was it the solitary confinement or was up on top? Am I remembering correctly?
There is an administrative segregation, an ag seg cell up there, and they would segregate into that one. But if you were self harming or was still disruptive, they would send you down to the first floor to the drunk tanks, which they did use as solitary confinement if they weren't full.
Okay. And the reason I ask that is there a section of the jail that is more haunted than others? That you say, oh, third floor, first floor, whatever. And what does that look like?
So it really depends, and it seems like it changes. In the very, very beginning, it was the third floor in the women's cell area. And the more we communicated, the more people we had come in, we started noticing that the drunk tank down on the bottom floor was very active. And then it shifted to the second floor. The second floor tends to have a more creepier, and when I say dark, I don't mean malevolent or anything like that. It's just a different type of activity. The people who are on the second floor, they tend to be more watchful. Like you'll be looking in reading some of the articles with the light off and using your flashlight. And it's not uncommon to see the reflection of a man appear behind you in the glass there. It's also not uncommon to see shadow figures on all three floors. Now, it seems as of late, the entire third floor has been much more active. It's been very active with residual footsteps. We hear those constantly, and they're crazy because you hear them, you acknowledge them, and they don't stop. They continue for about 15 footsteps, and they just sound like heavy combat boots going around the jailer's walk. We've been able to pinpoint that specific jailer's walk that they're going around, And we also have been able to pinpoint that it tends to happen around the top of the hour on certain days between 10 till and the top of the hour, throughout the day and at night. And so that seems to be one of the most active areas right now is upstairs on the third floor, in the cell blocks. But it does tend to change depending on the investigation routine routine that's going on.
Uh, this is a hard question, and you don't have to answer it. Who's your favorite spirit there in the jail? Do you have one?
That is a tough question. Um,
It's not a fair question, I know.
I think I really like. I would have to say it's narrowed down to two. There's a entity there in the kitchen that goes by the name Chef Dan, and it's crazy because we've gotten the first time we got his name, we got it on the Ovilus 5, and we were right outside the kitchen, and we got Chef and Dan. Or actually, we got Dan, and we were asking, what did you do here at the jail? And it said Chef. And so it was interesting because 2 weeks later, I was up on a guided ghost hunt, and I said, I was up in that area. I couldn't remember the name Dan. And I was like, who was the chef that we were talking to 2 weeks ago? And sure enough, we got Dan again. And then other people have gotten him. He really likes to communicate with flashlights. Sometimes when you're talking to him, you'll get residual smells, kind of smells like bologna frying, or bacon. And so I actually really like communicating with him because he seems to be a very active one. And then I really am fond of Sheriff Ellis as well because he had such a true devotion to his job and to the jail. And we've had different people come in that really didn't know about him and his situation, and they've said that he's paid some really nice. He was kind of gruff, but he paid some really nice compliments to some of the work that we've been doing there. And so I just find his story so tragic with his passion that he had, and it really feels like he kind of keeps an eye out for us with some of the more ornery spirits there at the jail too.
So he's still in charge and keeping people in line, which is good. Do we
Yeah.
know what happened to Chef Dan? Do we know his story, or we had a chance to figure that out yet?
We've not had a chance to figure that out yet. I do know that there was somebody that did work there in the kitchen. I believe his name was Jeff, but we've never been able to find a Dan. Now, I want to start going through some of the records and seeing what Dan's I can find that was in there. I don't know if he was actually a cook in there or if that was like his maybe his jail name, or even if that might have been his job that he did outside. I'm not really sure, but I do know he definitely likes to hang out in the kitchen, and that's what he likes to go by. So we're in the process of trying to find out as much information about him as we can.
And the fact that it smells like frying bologna is fantastic. That's perfect.
Yes, yes.
Before we say goodbye, if somebody wants to learn more about you, more about the jail, check in on what you're doing, how can they find you? How can they follow you? Where are you on social media?
Well, again, thank you for allowing me to come on and share my story and my story about the jail. So people they can watch all of the past 5 seasons of Ghost Biker Explorations on the Ghost Biker Explorations YouTube channel, Ghost Biker Explorations Facebook, or also www.ghostbikerexplorations.com. Season 6 will come out in October, and it will air every Tuesday night at 9 p.m. in October. And then you can also watch my weekly live stream podcast called Live from the Ghost Biker Garage every Thursday night at 9 p.m. You can find out more about the jail at www.historicscottcojail.com or on the Historic Scott County Jail Facebook page and YouTube channel. We're very active on those, and even host a weekly podcast on Sunday nights called the Jailhouse Informant there and it's at 8 p.m. Eastern on the Historic Scott County Jail page.
You are insanely busy, doing all of that, also doing tours and helping out mom, which is great. I can't again. Thank you so much for taking time out of your busy time to talk to me, to be involved in the Phantom History podcast. I'm a younger podcast, only 4 seasons in, still getting
Uh-huh.
my feet underneath me. So I appreciate the support of you coming on and sharing your story. And we will venture up there before too long. And I plan to check out that jail myself. I want to see it with my own eyes.
I would love it. We would absolutely love it.
Well, we will make that happen, and I'll have you protect me while we're there.
I'll do it.
All right. Thank you so much, Miranda. You enjoy the rest of your day, and I cannot wait to share your story with my listeners.
Thank you so much.
Have a great day.
You too.
Hey, thanks so much for watching that. Remember, go to phantomhistory.com and sign up on the newsletter so you are alerted when we have a new podcast. And check out our new bed and breakfast at phantomhistoryhouse.com where you can book your stay and we can talk ghost stories in person in the library. See you then.